The rope was already cutting into her wrists when Jasper Sutton crested the ridge above Tradewind Crossing and saw the crowd. He had traveled 3 days from Millbrook with flour dust still gray in the creases of his knuckles, expecting to ask quiet questions at trading stalls, not to find a mob of armed men dragging an orc woman across the packed dirt of the market square, while merchants scattered their wares to get out of the way. She was fighting them. Even bound, even outnumbered 5-1, she was fighting them, twisting her shoulder against a man twice her weight, and driving her boot into another's knee hard enough that Jasper heard the crack of it from 50 paces off. "Bounty says alive," one of the men shouted, backhanding her across the jaw. "Don't mean unbroken." Jasper did not remember deciding to run. He only remembered that his legs were moving before his mind had finished the thought, down the slope with his cart forgotten and rolling loose behind him, his heart slamming against his ribs like a hammer against a stone. He was not a fighter. He was a miller with calloused palms and a bad shoulder from 30 years of hauling grain sacks, and he had no business throwing himself between 5 armed bounty men and their prize. But the man who had struck her was drawing back his hand again, and something in Jasper simply would not let that happen twice. He grabbed the nearest man's raised arm with both hands and hauled backward with everything the mill had ever taught his body, and the man staggered, cursing, and rounded on him instead. "Get back, you fool, this isn't your fight." "She's on the ground," Jasper said, and his voice came out steadier than he felt. "That's enough. Whatever bounty you're chasing, that's enough." The leader of the men, a lean, sun-cracked fellow with a crossbow slung across his back, looked Jasper over with open contempt, the flour-dusted coat, the soft hands, the complete absence of a weapon at his hip, and laughed. "You want to die for an orc, farmer?" "I'm a miller," Jasper said, absurdly, as if the correction mattered, and then the orc woman on the ground used the distraction to drive her bound hands upward into the leader's groin with such force that he folded like a dropped sack of oats, and the whole square erupted into shouting. That was Jasper's first sight of Rasha Bloodhorn, on her knees in the dirt of a crossroads market, wrists raw and bloody from rope, one eye already swelling, and laughing, actually laughing, a low, wild, delighted sound at the sight of the man who tried to collect a bounty on her curled up and gasping in the dust. She looked up at Jasper as if seeing him for the first time, and something in her yellow-green eyes sharpened with an interest that had nothing to do with gratitude. "You," she said, in accented but perfectly clear trade tongue. "You're either very brave or very stupid." "Probably stupid," Jasper admitted, already reaching for the knife at his belt to saw at what remained of the rope binding, only to realize with a jolt that she had already broken it herself while he wasn't looking, and was rising to her feet with the frayed cord still hanging from one wrist like a bracelet. She was taller than him by half a head, with shoulders built for swinging an axe and a waist that his hands could probably span if he were ever foolish enough to try. Her skin was a deep mossy green, weathered from sun and wind, and she wore fitted leather warrior's leathers laced tight up both sides of a sleeveless cuirass that hugged every hard line of her, dark travel leggings tucked into scuffed boots, a wide belt at her hips that had once held twin curved blades before the bounty men took them. Twin braids of black hair, threaded with small bone beads, fell over one shoulder. There was a scar through her left eyebrow, old and pale, and a newer bruise blooming along her jaw where the man had struck her, and none of it, not one part of it, made her anything less than the most striking woman Jasper had ever laid eyes on in 31 years of quiet, unremarkable living. The remaining bounty men had gathered their wits and their weapons, but a ring of crossroads guards in mismatched armor was already pushing through the crowd, and a heavy-set man with a warden's chain of office around his neck was bellowing for order. "Crossroads law," he shouted. "No blood spilled on neutral ground. You know the penalty, Crane. Now put those blades away before I have the whole caravan guild banned from your father's trade route for the next 10 years. The bounty leader, Crane, apparently spat in the dirt, glared once more at Jasper as though memorizing his face for later, and backed away with his men, dragging their wounded companion between them. The warden turned to Rasha next, his expression far less friendly. "And you, Bloodhorn, are supposed to be banished, not brawling in my square every second week. I've half a mind to let them take you next time. Then you'd lose the only person keeping the eastern caravans from being robbed blind past the Thornwood Bend," Rasha said flatly. "Ask the Kessler wagon train who guarded them through the pass last month, Warden Bram." Bram Kessler, for that, Jasper would soon learn, was the warden's full name, grunted something that was not quite agreement and stalked off to disperse the rest of the gawking crowd, leaving Jasper standing alone in the settling dust with an orc woman who was studying him now with open, unhurried curiosity, as though he were a puzzle she intended to enjoy solving. "You didn't answer," she said. "Brave or stupid?" "Maybe I just don't like watching a woman get beaten in the street," Jasper said. "Whatever she's done." Something flickered behind her eyes at that surprise he thought quickly hidden. "And what do you think I've done, little Miller, to have men chasing bounty on my head?" "I don't know yet," Jasper admitted. "But I intend to find out. My name's Jasper Sutton, and I've come a long way to talk to you, Rasha Bloodhorn." Her whole body went still. The playful edge dropped from her face like a mask coming off, replaced by something colder and infinitely more dangerous. "You know my name. I was sent to find you." "Sent," she said the word like a curse. "By Vane." "By my village council," Jasper said carefully. "Millbrook on the Alderwash. We're bound by the same treaty your clan signed with Lord Vane's March. They sent me because I trade grain through this crossroads twice a year and know the roads, not because they thought I could drag an armed orc woman home by force, believe me. I'm not built for that particular job." For a long moment Rasha only looked at him, chest still rising and falling from the fight, blood drying at her split lip, and Jasper had the strange sensation of being weighed on some invisible scale. "Then you've wasted a long walk," she said finally, and turned to go. "Wait." He caught himself reaching for her arm and thought better of it, letting his hand fall. "At least let me buy you a meal for the trouble those men caused. You're bleeding." "I am always bleeding, little Miller. It has never stopped me from finishing what I start." But she paused, one dark brow arching, something almost amused returning to her battered face. "You are strange. Most humans who come looking for me arrive with rope and soldiers, not bread and apologies." "I only had bread," Jasper said. The apology was free. That earned him, unexpectedly, a short bark of laughter, rough and warm despite herself. "Fine, Jasper Sutton. Buy me your bread. Then you can tell me exactly what fool Aaron brought a miller 3 days from home to fetch a banished orc who has no intention of being fetched." They sat on an overturned crate outside a trading post crowded with wagons from 4 different peoples. Human traders in wool cloaks. A pair of tall, gray-skinned wanderers Jasper didn't recognize haggling over dyed cloth. A half-orc caravan master shouting orders at his drivers. While Jasper laid out the whole tangled situation as plainly as he knew how, because he sensed, correctly, that this woman would see through anything less than the truth in a heartbeat. Millbrook and a dozen villages like it sat along the border the maps called the March, land that had been fought over between the human kingdoms and the orc clans for 3 generations before an uneasy peace had finally taken hold. That peace had been sealed, 5 months ago, by a marriage alliance, Rasha Bloodhorn, daughter of matriarch Uska Bloodhorn, to be wed to Lord Edric Vane, the March's ruling noble, binding clan and crown together in blood and law. "I know the treaty better than you, I imagine," Rasha said, tearing a piece of bread with more force than necessary. "I was the one meant to bleed for it." "Then you know it fell apart," Jasper said. "And ever since, the raids along the border have started again. Cattle stolen, barns burned, 2 men from Alder's Ford dead in an ambush last month that everyone blames on your people, whether that's fair or not. Vane says the treaty's only remedy is to see it finished, the marriage completed, as agreed." He sent word to every village on the march that whoever brings you back to stand before him will be rewarded, and that any village that refuses to help will lose his protection when the clans push further. My council voted to send someone quiet, someone who wouldn't be seen as a threat. They picked me. Because you are harmless, Rasha said, not unkindly studying him. Because I know this crossroads and because nobody else wanted the job, Jasper said. I won't pretend it's a prouder reason than that. Rasha was quiet a long moment, turning the bread over in her large hands, and when she spoke again her voice had lost its mocking edge entirely. Do you know why I ran, Jasper Sutton, instead of standing at that altar like a good and obedient bride? No, he said honestly. Nobody in Millbrook seems to know, or if they do, they haven't told me. I only know you broke Lord Vane's wrist during some kind of ceremony, and that your mother banished you for it before he could demand your death instead. Something raw crossed her face, there and gone. The Bloodhorn way, when a marriage binds two peoples for peace, is this. The bride and groom test each other first in open combat so that all can see neither enters the bond as a coward or a fool. It is meant to be fair. Blunted blades, first blood only, no killing strokes. I have won such matches before, against my own clan's warriors, and no one thought less of me for it. Her jaw tightened. Vane agreed to the terms in front of his own lords and mine. And when I put him on his back in front of 200 witnesses, fairly, cleanly, he could not bear it. He ordered his soldiers to hold me down instead, to force me to yield where I would not yield freely, and when I broke free of them and broke his wrist doing it, he told his own people I had attacked him without cause, that I meant murder, not marriage. She looked at Jasper directly, and there was no plea in her eyes, only a terrible, weary honesty. My mother believed I had shamed the clan. Or she believed Vane's lie was safer to accept than the truth, because the truth meant war, and banishing one daughter was cheaper than a war with the march. Either way, she chose the treaty over me. I have not seen her since. Jasper sat with that for a long moment, the noise of the crossroads market washing around them, hawkers calling prices, a mule braying somewhere, the ring of a smith's hammer, and felt something in his chest settle into a hard, quiet certainty. Then you were right to leave, he said. Rasha went very still. You believe me, just like that. I've spent my whole life watching men like Vane come through Millbrook demanding grain at half price because they can, and smiling while they do it, Jasper said. I don't need to have seen it to know the shape of a man who can't stand losing to a woman in front of a crowd. And I've never once, in 3 days of walking this road thinking about how to talk you into coming back, imagined you'd tell me a story that made you sound like anything other than exactly what you are, someone who was punished for refusing to be broken. He shook his head slowly. I was sent to bring you home to marry that man. I'm not going to do it. Then your council will call you a failure. Probably, Jasper agreed. Wouldn't be the first time. Rasha studied him for a long, unreadable moment, and then, unexpectedly, reached out and took a piece of the bread from his own hand, not asking, simply taking, the way she seemed to take most things she wanted, and ate it slowly, watching him the entire time with an expression that made the back of Jasper's neck go warm. You are a strange little miller, she said again, softer this time. Sit with me a while longer, Jasper Sutton. I find I am not tired of you yet. He stayed. It was not supposed to become a season. Jasper told himself, the first week, that he was only lingering long enough to send word back to Millbrook that the errand had failed honestly rather than been abandoned, a message carried by a trader heading west, explaining that Rasha Bloodhorn would not be returning, and that he, Jasper, intended to see what other arrangements might be reached before giving up on the treaty entirely. It was, technically, true. It was also a convenient shape to put around the plainer fact that he did not want to leave the crossroads, or more precisely, did not want to leave her. Tradewind Crossing sprawled along the meeting of 4 trade roads in a wide river valley, a permanent 10-10 timber town that answered to no single crown, canvas awnings and hide tents pitched beside squat log trading posts, corrals of horses and oxen, a saloon of rough gray stone called the Broken Wheel, where every language on the march could be heard shouted over cards on any given night. Humans, orcs, half-orcs, wandering traders of stranger blood all passed through under Warden Bram Kessler's uneasy neutral law. And it was there, in the third week, that Jasper found the thing that gave him a reason to stay that even the most suspicious member of his own council could not argue with. The Crossroads mill was broken, had been broken for 2 years, according to the old miller's widow who ran the flour stall nearby, ever since the previous miller died of a fever, and no one who passed through knew enough of grain work to fix the great water wheel that sat rotting and still on the bank of the river that cut through the settlement. Every sack of flour sold at that crossroads was hauled in by cart from 3 days away, at prices that made half the caravan cook's curse. Jasper walked out to look at the wheel on his 4th day, more out of habit than purpose, the way another man might wander toward a familiar smell of home cooking, and found himself 2 hours later stripped to his shirt sleeves, up to his knees in the shallows, running his hands over the warped timber of the wheel's paddles the way he might run his hands over an old friend's face. "It's not beyond saving," he told Rasha that evening, when she found him still damp and filthy and grinning like a fool at the trading post fire. "The axle's cracked, but the stones underneath are good alderwash granite, better than what we've got at home even. Give me 2 weeks and enough timber and I could have this thing turning again." "Why would you bother?" Rasha asked, though there was no scorn in it, only genuine curiosity, her eyes bright in the firelight. "This is not your village. This mill feeds no one who is yours." "Because a broken mill is a wound in a place like this," Jasper said. "Everyone here depends on grain from somewhere else, at whatever price the somewhere else demands. Fix the wheel, and the crossroads doesn't need to bend the knee to anyone's price. Seems worth 2 weeks of my time." He glanced at her sideways. "And because it means I have a reason to stay that even Warden Bram can't argue with." Rasha's mouth curved, slow and warm, an expression he was coming to recognize and crave more than he was entirely comfortable admitting. "You could simply say you wish to stay near me, little miller. It would save you the trouble of fixing an entire mill. Would it work as well?" "No," she admitted, laughing. "I think I like the mill better. It is a very large gift for a woman who has given you nothing in return." "You gave me your name," Jasper said, "and an honest answer when you didn't have to." "That's not nothing." Something shifted in her face at that, the teasing light banking down into something quieter, more searching, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all, the fire cracking between them, the noise of the broken wheel spilling laughter and fiddle music into the dark. The 2 weeks of mill work became 3, and in that time Jasper Sutton learned things about Rasha Bloodhorn that no report to any village council could have captured. He learned she could outdrink every guard in the broken wheel and still walk a straight line home. He learned she kept a small carved wooden horse in her pack, a gift from a younger cousin she had not seen since her banishment, and that she touched it sometimes at night when she thought no one was watching. He learned she had killed exactly 4 men in her life, all of them in fair combat defending caravans that had hired her blade, and that she carried the weight of each death with a seriousness that surprised him, given her fearsome reputation at the crossroads. He learned that she laughed easily and often, that she loved strong spiced wine, and hated the taste of most human bread, except the kind Jasper baked himself from the Crossroads mill's first batch of flour, and that she watched him work the mill with an intensity that made his hands clumsy and his face hot. She, in turn, learned things about him, that he was gentler than his size suggested and stronger than his softness implied, that he had run the Sutton mill alone since his father's hands had grown too stiff for the work, and his mother had gone to live with his married sister 2 villages over, and that he had never once complained of the loneliness of it, though it lived in him plainly enough that Rasha named it within their first month of knowing each other. "You are lonely," she said one evening, without preamble, as they sat on the riverbank watching the half-repaired wheel turn its first slow, groaning revolution in 2 years. "It is in the way you speak of your village, fondly, but like a man describing a house he visits rather than one he lives in. Jasper considered lying and found he did not want to. "I suppose I am. Millbrook's a good village, good people, but nobody there particularly needs me for anything but flour, and a man can start to feel like little more than the wheel itself after a while. Useful, not exactly seen." "I see you," Rasha said simply, and the quiet certainty in her voice did something to Jasper's chest that no amount of hard labor at the wheel had managed. "Careful," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "A man could get used to hearing that from you." "Good," Rasha said, and turned to look at him fully, her yellow-green eyes catching the last orange light off the water. "I intend for you too." It was 3 days later that the bandits came for the caravan. A trading train of 9 wagons had rolled in from the North Road that morning, laden with iron and salted meat bound for the coastal towns, and Jasper had gone with Rasha and 2 other hired guards to see them safely past the notorious stretch of forest road known as the Thornwood Bend, a favor to the caravan master who'd once helped Rasha when she first arrived at the crossroads with nothing but the clothes on her back. Jasper had come along not because anyone needed a miller's help defending a caravan, but because he could not stand the thought of Rasha riding into danger while he sat idle by a half-finished mill wheel, and because, if he was honest with himself, he did not want to be parted from her for even a single day if he could help it. The attack came at dusk, a dozen riders bursting from the tree line with torches and blades, the same bounty man Crane at their head, apparently deciding that if he could not collect on Rasha's head cleanly, he would try again where fewer witnesses could interfere. "Miller!" Rasha shouted, already swinging down from her horse with both curved blades drawn, moving like poured water given violent purpose. "Get behind the wagons now." Jasper did not get behind the wagons. He grabbed a fallen torch instead and swung it at the nearest rider's horse, spooking the animal into rearing and throwing its rider hard into the underbrush. And then he was hauling a wounded caravan driver out from under a collapsed crate, while arrows hissed past his ear close enough to stir his hair, his heart pounding a wild rhythm that had nothing to do with courage and everything to do with terror, doing exactly what it was supposed to do, keeping him moving, keeping him useful, keeping him alive. He heard Rasha's voice cutting through the chaos like a blade of its own, calling out warnings, driving the guards into a defensive line, and when Crane himself came at Jasper with a drawn sword, clearly recognizing the miller who had humiliated him weeks before, Jasper had one bare second to think that this was, quite possibly, how his unremarkable life would end. And then Rasha was there, stepping bodily between them, catching Crane's blade on her own with a shower of sparks and a force that drove the man back 3 full steps. "Touch him," she said, low and lethal, "and I will finish what I started at that market." Crane looked between her murderous expression and Jasper's white face, made a swift and sensible calculation, and fled into the trees with what remained of his men, leaving the caravan bruised and shaken but alive, 3 wagons scorched, 1 driver with a broken arm, and no dead among them, which the caravan master would later call the finest luck the Thornwood Bend had shown in a decade. It was after, when the fires were banked and the wounded tended, and the rest of the guards had settled into exhausted watches around the camp, that Jasper found Rasha sitting apart from the others, cleaning blood from her blade by lantern light, her hands, he noticed, trembling very slightly in a way her voice never did. "You could have died tonight," he said, sitting beside her without asking, "stepping between me and that sword." "So could you have, running at a mounted rider with nothing but a torch," Rasha shot back, though the anger in it was thin, papering over something rower beneath. "What were you thinking, Jasper Sutton?" "I wasn't going to hide behind a wagon while you fought for both of us," he said. "That's not who I am. I know I'm no warrior, Rasha. I know you could probably break me in half without much effort, but I'm not going to be a man who stands aside and lets the woman he stopped himself, too late, the word already half out into the night air between them. Rasha went very still, the blade forgotten in her lap. "Finish it," she said quietly. "Say the rest of it or don't say the beginning at all." Jasper looked at her bruised, blood-flecked, magnificent, watching him with an intensity that stripped away every ounce of caution he had left, and decided, for the second time since arriving at this crossroads, that the truth was worth more than his own comfort. "The woman I love," he said. "I don't know when it happened. Somewhere between you laughing at that bounty man on the ground and you stepping in front of a sword for me tonight, I fell in love with you, Rasha Bloodhorn, and I don't know what to do with that, because I was sent here to drag you back to a marriage that would have destroyed you, and instead I've gone and fallen for you myself, which is either the bravest thing I've ever done or the most foolish, and right now I honestly can't tell which." For a long moment, Rasha said nothing at all, and Jasper's heart climbed into his throat, certain he had ruined something irreplaceable with his own clumsy honesty. Then she set the blade aside, reached out, and pulled him toward her by the front of his shirt with a strength that left no room for hesitation, and kissed him fierce and hungry and certain, one hand fisted in his hair, the other flat against his chest, as though she meant to memorize the beat of his heart through her palm. Jasper made a small, helpless sound against her mouth and kissed her back with everything 3 weeks of aching, careful restraint had built up in him, and when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rasha rested her forehead against his and laughed, low and shaking. "Foolish," she said. "Both of us entirely foolish. My clan would call it madness, a bloodhorn falling for a soft-handed miller who cannot even lift a full grain sack without complaining the next morning." "I never complain," Jasper protested weakly. "You groan like an old man every single time," Rasha said, grinning against his mouth. "It is very endearing. Do not stop." She pulled back enough to look at him properly, her expression sobering. "I have watched men come and go from that crossroads for 2 years, Jasper Sutton. Traders, guards, lords' sons looking for a wild orc story to tell at their dinner tables. None of them ever once made me feel as you do, as though I am not a curiosity to be handled carefully, nor a weapon to be pointed at someone else's enemies, but simply myself, and enough." She touched his face, calloused fingers surprisingly gentle against his jaw. "I did not think I would find that here. I did not think I would find it with a human, of all creatures, and certainly not with the very man sent to end my freedom. I'm glad your clan's plans and my council's plans both fell apart then," Jasper murmured and kissed her again, softer this time, and the night around them. The smoldering wagons, the tired guards, the whole complicated tangle of treaties and bounties and banishments fell away for a little while into something that felt, for the first time in either of their lives, entirely simple. The rider from Millbrook found them 11 days later, and the news he carried put an end to any illusion that simplicity could last. "Lord Vane's given the council an ultimatum," the young man said, dust-covered and grim, having ridden hard the whole way. "Bring Rasha Bloodhorn back to complete the marriage within the month, or he withdraws his soldiers from the border entirely and lets the raiding clans do as they please. Elder Reeve sent me to find you, Jasper. He says if you can't bring her back, you'd best come home yourself, because Vane's threatening to make an example of Millbrook specifically, since it was your village that sent the man who failed the errand." Jasper felt the words land like stones in his stomach. "An example? What does that mean?" "Nobody's saying it plain," the rider admitted, "but there's talk of soldiers burning the mill, yours specifically, as a message to the rest of the march about what happens to villages that don't deliver what Vane asks for." Rasha, standing beside Jasper with her arms crossed, went rigid at that, her jaw tightening in a way Jasper had learned meant fury held carefully in check. "He would burn a mill that feeds an entire village," she said, "to punish one miller for a mission he never should have been sent on in the first place." "That's Vane," the rider said miserably. "Begging your pardon, ma'am." After the rider had been fed and sent to rest, Jasper and Rasha walked along the riverbank in silence for a long while, the newly turning mill wheel groaning softly behind them, before Rasha finally spoke. "You should go home," she said, Protect your village. I will not ask you to choose between your people's safety and me, Jasper. That is not a fair choice to put before anyone. And what happens to you if Vane comes here himself? Jasper asked. You think he'll simply let this go because I've gone home to mind my mill? I have survived worse than Edric Vane. I know you have, Jasper said. That's not the point. The point is I'm not leaving you to face him alone so my village can keep its barns standing. Rasha. There has to be another way through this that doesn't end with either you in chains or my neighbors' homes burned. There may not be, Rasha said quietly. Some knots do not untie gently, little miller. Sometimes they must be cut. That night, unable to sleep, Jasper found her sitting alone outside her tent, sharpening a blade she did not need to sharpen, her carved wooden horse turning slowly in her other hand. He sat beside her without a word, and after a long while she set both blade and toy aside and turned to look at him with an openness she had rarely shown even in their most intimate moments. There is a thing my people do, she said slowly. When a warrior chooses a mate against all counsel, against clan and custom and sense, a claiming done before witnesses, that even a banished orc retains the right to make, for it comes from the blood itself and not from any matriarch's favor. It cannot be undone by any outside law, human or orc, once it is spoken and marked. If I claimed you so before enough witnesses at that crossroads, no treaty signed by my mother, no marriage demanded by Vane could touch what stood between us afterward. It would not be simple. It would not be safe. Vane would call it an insult, a mockery of his authority, and he is not a man who takes insult quietly. She searched his face. I would not ask this of you lightly, Jasper. It is not just words. It is blood and a mark and a promise that does not break, not ever, not for any reason. Do you understand what I am asking? You're asking if I'll marry you, Jasper said softly, in front of the whole crossroads, knowing it might mean war with a lord who wants to burn my home to the ground. Yes. Then my answer is yes, Jasper said, without a single second of hesitation, and watched something in Rasha's face crack open with a relief so profound it looked almost like pain. I decided a long time ago, Rasha, that whatever it cost me, I wasn't sending you back to that man. I meant it then. I mean it more now. She kissed him then, slow and deep and trembling faintly, and drew him by the hand into her tent, and the fire outside burned low while inside, beneath firs and lantern light. They came together at last with none of the caution that had governed every moment before, her hands mapping the solid, unglamorous strength of him with open hunger, his mouth finding the pulse at her throat and the old scar above her eye, and the soft place at her hip where no blade had ever marked her. Both of them murmuring names and promises between kisses, unhurried despite the danger circling closer with every passing day, because some things, they both seemed to understand without saying it aloud, deserved to be. Given time, even when time was the one thing neither of them could be certain of. When it was over, they lay tangled together in the dark, her head against his chest, his fingers tracing slow lines along her spine, and for a little while the whole frightening world outside the tent canvas simply ceased to exist. Lord Edric Vane arrived at Tradewind Crossing 8 days later with 30 mounted soldiers, a herald blowing a horn to announce his approach, and an expression, Jasper thought when he finally saw the man in person, of someone entirely unaccustomed to being told no. He was younger than Jasper had imagined, and handsomer, with the kind of polished, easy confidence that came from a lifetime of never once doubting his own importance. His right wrist, Jasper noted, still sat slightly crooked beneath its glove, a permanent reminder of the day Rasha Bloodhorn had put him on his back in front of 200 witnesses. The whole crossroads had turned out by the time Vane's party reached the central square, merchants abandoning their stalls, caravan guards drifting in from the corrals, the half-orc caravan master standing arms crossed atop a wagon for a better view, Warden Bram Kessler pushing through the crowd with his chain of office clutched like a shield. Word had spread fast in the days since the young rider's news, as it always did at a crossroads built on nothing but talk and trade, and everyone, it seemed, had come to see what would happen when a jilted lord finally caught up to the orc who had humiliated him. "Rasha Bloodhorn," Vane called out from atop his horse, his voice carrying easily across the square, pitched for the whole crowd to hear. "You've led me a fine chase these past months, but the dance is over. The treaty stands. You will come with me now, willingly or otherwise, and this farce of a peace will finally be made whole." Rasha stepped forward from the crowd to meet him, and Jasper's heart climbed into his throat as he moved to stand beside her, refusing to let her face this alone, ignoring the way several of Vane's soldiers shifted hands to weapons at the sight of a human standing so plainly at an orc's side against their lord. "There is no treaty left to make whole, Edric," Rasha said, her voice steady and carrying just as far as his had. "My mother banished me the moment your lie reached her ears. A banished woman is no daughter of the Bloodhorn clan, and no clanless orc can be bound by a marriage her matriarch arranged. You know this. Every soul on this march who understands our laws knows this. You have chased a ghost of a treaty for 5 months because your pride cannot bear the truth that I bested you fairly, and you could not stand it." A murmur rippled through the watching crowd, merchants and traders exchanging glances, and Vane's composed expression cracked for just a moment into something uglier. "Careful how you speak to me, creature," he snapped. "I could have this entire crossroads burned to cinders for the insult you've shown me, and not a soul in the march would raise a hand to stop me." "Try it," said Warden Bram Kessler, stepping forward with surprising steel in his voice, "and you'll find the Caravan Guild remembers exactly whose grain and iron and salt crossed this valley to feed your own soldiers, my lord. Burn the crossroads, and you starve your own garrisons within the season. Crossroads law protects every soul standing on this ground, noble or clanless, and I'll not see it broken on my watch for the sake of one man's wounded pride." Vane's jaw tightened, but he did not dismount, did not order his men forward, clearly calculating the cost of defying the warden's warning in front of a crowd this large. Instead, his eyes fell on Jasper, standing steady at Rasha's side, and something cold and vicious sparked behind them. "And who is this?" Vane said slowly. "That stands so boldly beside my intended bride. A miller, if the dust on his boots tells true. Tell me, little miller, do you know what happens to men who interfere in the affairs of lords?" "I imagine it's nothing pleasant," Jasper said, and was faintly astonished to hear his own voice come out level despite the fear roaring through him. "But I'm not interfering in your affairs, my lord. I'm standing beside the woman I love, on ground where you have no more authority than any other man here. If you want to drag her away against her will, you'll have to go through me first, and I suspect that would look very poor indeed in front of this many witnesses, a March lord striking down an unarmed miller to steal a woman who's already told you plainly that she wants nothing to do with you." The crowd's murmur swelled into something louder. Sharper Jasper caught the word shame pass through the gathered merchants, and someone else muttered that Vane had lost the duel fair and square months ago and ought to have the decency to admit it, and Vane's face flushed dark with a fury he could no longer entirely hide. "You would throw yourself away for her," he said to Jasper, disbelieving. "A creature that could snap your neck without breaking a sweat, and you'd stand between her and a lord of the march." "I would," Jasper said simply, "because she's worth more to me than my own safety, and because she was right to leave you, and I decided that the very first day I met her." It was Rasha who moved next, and it was this moment, this exact blazing moment, that would be spoken of at Tradewind Crossing for years afterward, told and retold at every fire and trading stall along that stretch of road, until it passed into something like local legend. She drew the small belt knife from her hip, the crowd going utterly silent as she did, and before anyone could react, she drew the blade shallowly across her own palm, hissing softly at the sting, and then reached for Jasper's hand and did the same to his, quick and sure, before pressing their bleeding palms together in front of the entire assembled crowd. "By blood and witness," she said, her voice ringing clear across the stunned square. "I claim Jasper Sutton as my chosen mate, under the old right that no banishment can strip from me and no treaty made in my name without my voice can override. Let every soul here see it and remember it. He is mine and I am his, and any hand raised against him is raised against a Bloodhorn's claim, clan or no clan, banished or no." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone actually cheered, a rough caravan guard whooping in open delight at the spectacle, and Warden Bram Kessler was already nodding slowly, recognizing the old law even if half the human onlookers did not, while Vane sat frozen atop his horse, his mouth working soundlessly for several long seconds before rage finally found its voice. "This is madness," he snarled. "A mockery. You cannot simply declare." "It is Orc law older than your march, my lord," Bram Kessler said, and there was something almost satisfied in the warden's tone. "I've seen it invoked twice before in 20 years at this crossroads, and both times it held. She's clanless, which means the claiming right belongs to her alone to invoke, with no matriarch's blessing required. Whatever treaty you signed with the Bloodhorn clan, it was signed with a matriarch who no longer claims this woman as her own. You have no more legal hold on Rasha Bloodhorn than you have on me, my lord, and I'd advise you to consider very carefully what it will look like, up and down every trade road in the march, if you draw a blade against a claimed mating on neutral ground over a dead treaty." For a long, terrible moment, Jasper thought Vane might do exactly that anyway. His hand had drifted toward the sword at his hip, his face a mask of humiliated fury, 30 soldiers at his back, and a crowd of merchants and caravan guards the only thing standing between him and satisfaction. Rasha's grip tightened on Jasper's bleeding hand, and he felt her shift her weight, ready to put herself bodily in front of him again if it came to that, and some part of him, the part that had run down that ridge weeks ago without a single thought for his own safety, found himself stepping half in front of her instead, the two of them each trying stubbornly to shield the other, and something about that image, two people so determined to protect each other that neither would stand fully behind, seemed finally to reach even the crowd's rowdiest edges, until the whole square had gone hushed and watchful, waiting to see what a lord of the march would do when his authority meant nothing at all. On this particular patch of ground, Vane looked around at the silent, judging faces of merchants whose goods fed his garrisons, guards whose blades kept his roads safe, traders whose gold filled his coffers, and something in his calculation finally broke. "This changes nothing," he said, though his voice had lost its earlier command. "The border raids will continue. Without this marriage, I have no reason to spend my soldiers' blood protecting villages like Millbrook. Then you'll answer for that choice to every lord above you when the march's trade routes dry up because no caravan wants to risk your unprotected roads," Bram Kessler said flatly. "Or perhaps, my lord, you might consider that a treaty built on a lie and a forced marriage was never worth much protection in the first place, and that a new peace, an honest one, negotiated with clans who still trade fairly through this crossroads regardless of one banished daughter's fate, might serve the march rather better than the one you've spent 5 months chasing a ghost to salvage." It took 3 more days of tense negotiation conducted, at Bram Kessler's insistence, on neutral crossroads ground with the warden himself as witness, before Lord Vane, faced with the combined pressure of the caravan guild threatening to reroute trade around his territory entirely, and several of his own border lords quietly informing him that continued raids without a treaty would cost far more than his pride was worth, agreed to a new arrangement. A trade and peace agreement with the crossroads merchants and the border clans directly, bypassing the Bloodhorn matriarch's original marriage terms entirely, guaranteeing protection for villages like Millbrook in exchange for fair grain prices. And open roads, with no bride required at all. Word of it reached Rasha's mother 9 days later, carried by a trader who had witnessed the claiming with his own eyes, and 3 weeks after that, A small envoy arrived at the crossroads under a banner Rasha recognized instantly, the black horn sigil of her own clan. Matriarch Uzka Bloodhorn was older than Jasper had pictured, silver threading through her dark hair, her bearing regal even dismounting from a travel-worn horse. And when she found her daughter standing at the edge of the market square, her composure cracked in a way that surprised everyone watching, including, Jasper thought, Rasha herself. "I heard what you did," Uzka said, her voice rough. "The claiming, in front of the whole crossroads." "I did," Rasha said, chin lifted, bracing visibly for judgment. "I heard, too, what the man Vane truly did that day at the ritual grounds," her mother continued. "The truth of it, finally, from witnesses who had no reason left to lie for him now that his own lords have turned against his account. I was wrong to believe his word over yours, Rasha. I chose the treaty's safety over my own daughter's honor, and I have regretted it every single day since, though I did not know how to undo it without breaking what little peace remained." Her eyes moved to Jasper, standing a respectful distance away, and something assessing entered her gaze. "This is the human you have claimed." "Jasper Sutton," Rasha said, and there was no small amount of pride in how she said it. "The only man Vane ever sent after me who decided, the moment he learned the truth, that I had been right to leave rather than obey." Uzka studied him for a long moment, and Jasper, feeling very much like a man being weighed by a queen, straightened his shoulders and met her eyes squarely. "I love your daughter, Matriarch," he said simply, before she could ask. "I know I'm not what anyone would have chosen for her, not a warrior, not a lord, nothing but a miller from a small village most maps don't bother naming. But I've stood beside her against bounty hunters and bandits and a lord with 30 soldiers at his back, and I intend to keep standing beside her for whatever's left of my life, if she'll still have me." "She has already claimed you before the whole of Tradewind Crossing," Uzka said, something that might almost have been the beginning of a smile touching her weathered face. "I do not believe the matter is much in question, human." She turned back to Rasha, and her voice softened. "I cannot undo the banishment with a word, daughter. Clan law does not bend so easily, even for a matriarch's regret. But I can and will name you welcome at any Bloodhorn fire from this day forward, clan right restored, should you ever wish to return. And I would very much like to see this claiming made proper, before witnesses who love you, rather than only before strangers at a crossroads market." It was Rasha, this time, whose composure broke, her fierce warrior's face crumpling for just a moment before she caught her mother in a fierce embrace that spoke more of 5 months of grief than any words could have managed. And Jasper stood back and let them have that moment, feeling something warm and unfamiliar settle in his own chest at the sight of it. The quiet, unglamorous joy of watching two people he loved find their way back to each other. The wedding, when it came 3 weeks later, was held on the riverbank beside the newly restored Crossroads mill, its great wheel turning steady and strong in the current, ground flour from its first proper harvest dusting the air with a smell Jasper had always loved, and now would never separate from this day for the rest of his life. It was, by necessity and by choice, a strange and beautiful blending of customs neither community had ever seen combined quite this way before. Warden Bram Kessler stood as witness on behalf of the crossroads itself, declaring the union bound under neutral law and honored by trade right from that day forward. Matriarch Uzka Bloodhorn spoke the old clan words over her daughter's joined hands, her voice thick with an emotion she made no effort to hide. A delegation from Millbrook had come as well, Elder Reeve among them, along with a dozen villagers curious, and more than a little nervous to see the miller they'd sent off on a hopeless errand return, instead with an orc bride and a restored peace neither Vane nor anyone else had managed to broker. And if some of them eyed Rasha warily at first, it did not survive long past the moment she smiled at them with open, unguarded warmth and asked, in careful trade tongue she'd been practicing for weeks, whether Millbrook's bread tasted anything like the Crossroads' own. Jasper wore his good coat, brushed free of flour dust for the first time in years, and Rasha wore her same fitted travel leathers, polished and oiled for the occasion, a fresh bone bead braid woven through her dark hair. And when she walked toward him along the riverbank with the mill wheel turning behind her, and the whole strange gathering of humans and orcs and crossroads traders watching in a silence that felt more like reverence than curiosity, Jasper thought his heart might simply give out from the sheer improbable joy of it. "You look terrified," Rasha murmured when she reached him, her eyes bright with laughter beneath the solemnity of the moment. "I've never been surer of anything in my life," Jasper said. "Terrified and sure aren't opposites, apparently." "No," Rasha agreed softly. "I find they rarely are." She took his hand, the old claiming scar on her palm a pale line against the green, and pressed it deliberately against the matching scar on his own. "I told you that night by the river that whatever I claimed I would not break. Do you remember?" "I remember everything about that night," Jasper said. "Good," Rasha said. "Because I meant every word, Jasper Sutton. I was banished from my clan, hunted by bounty men, nearly forced into a marriage that would have broken something essential in me. And out of all of it, out of every terrible turn my life took, I found you. A miller who ran down a hill with nothing but flour on his hands and no weapon but his own foolish courage, and decided I was worth standing beside no matter what it cost him. I would not undo a single moment of that road if it led me here again." "Neither would I," Jasper said, and when Warden Bram Kessler cleared his throat and asked, in the plain and unceremonious way of crossroads law, whether the two of them wished to be bound before all present as claimed and chosen mates, they answered together, without a single second of hesitation between them, and the whole gathered crowd, human and orc, merchant and villager, warden and matriarch alike, erupted into a cheer that carried clean across the water and startled a flock of birds up from the riverside willows into the wide, bright autumn sky. That evening, as the crossroads celebrated long into the night with music from 3 different peoples tangled together into something new and lovely, Jasper stood at the mill wheel with Rasha's arms around him from behind, her chin resting on his shoulder, watching the water catch the last orange light of the sun. "I was sent here to bring you home," he said quietly. "I think I found it instead." "You did not find it," Rasha murmured against his ear, her voice warm with a happiness he suspected she had not let herself believe possible for a very long time. "You built it, little miller, wheel by wheel, plank by plank, the same as you did everything else worth having in your life." She turned him gently in her arms to face her, green eyes soft in the fading light. "And I intend to stay in it beside you for every day left to either of us." "Good," Jasper said, and kissed her there beside the turning wheel, with the whole crossroads singing behind them and the river running steady and unbroken toward whatever came next. "Because I was never letting you go again, Rasha Bloodhorn. Banished, claimed, or anything in between, you were always right to leave that other life behind. I just happened to be lucky enough to be standing there when you did."